To what extent was the Korean War a Cold War conflict? By J. C. Block. The Cold War, like its name, was cold, harsh, 46 years of tension and violence between the western part of the world, led by the United States and her NATO allies, and the communist side of the world, led by the Soviet Union and its allies such as China and North Korea. Even though it started on 1945, which was 5 years earlier than the ignition of the Korean War, these two events share a bond that cannot be withered away, because one could not exist without the other. Quite frankly, Korean War was what ignited actual physical violence between the two sides of the world that shared different ideologies. Before, they limited themselves to sharing different opinions during meetings and conferences. The tension rose because they found each other impossible to agree with. After World War II, after Korea was liberated from Japan's rules and laws due to United States on August 25, 1945, they decided to divide Korea in half using the 38th parallel as the mid-segment due to their thought of potential military growth within Korea that might threaten other countries in the future, such as the United States. The 30th parallel, also known as DMZ, divided Korea into two parts, the northern half and the southern half. The northern half was controlled by the Soviet Union, and the southern half was owned by the United States. Soon, the Soviet Union, led by Stalin, quickly persuaded and engulfed other countries. Even the powerful countries were no exception. Soon enough, a domino effect started to take place. All the countries from China to North Korea, all within Asia of course, were overpowered and joined communist Russia. As time withered away, new great communist leaders such as Mao Zedong of China or Kim Il-sung of North Korea appeared to make the situation even more difficult for the Americans in the southern half of the world. Seeing an uncontrollable growth rate of communists and their influence around the world, the United States decided to converge an organization called United Nations, where all other non-communist countries left standing came together and lent help to each other during times of crisis. Meanwhile, Stalin was positive that US would no longer interfere with his plans due to his infamous massive army and property, accepted Kim Il-sung's request to engulf South Korea to become a stronger communist Korea by uniting. So, on June 25, 1950, Kim Il-sung ordered his military force to launch a secret assault on South Korea. Even though the South Korean military force responded immediately, they had to move back as their military technologies were nothing compared to the Russians and they were not ready. The North Korean forces led by Russian strategists showed vivid progress by conquering Seoul and Incheon in less than a week. Soon, Busan was the only city left standing. As the combined forces quickly advanced to the border of Busan, Song Man-lee, the first president of Korea, told the State Department to call for help from the US. Truman, president of US at that time, quickly responded by sending US forces that were located in Japan along with some combined army mixed from 15 different nations gathered for UN purposes of salvation and support. As the Western Army gathered at the port of Busan and defended against northern attacks, the attacks started to decline as the fatigued soldiers had to rest. General Douglas, who saw this as a vital chance for a secret assault, sent over 3 fleets to the port of Incheon and demolished everything in a few minutes. Of course, the soldiers counterattacked, but they weren't prepared enough. Now, the supply route for the North Korean soldiers had been cut, and they had no choice but to do a full-scale retreat to their northern half of the 30th parallel line. Soon enough, the UN forces quickly trooped up north and conquered Pyongyang, which was the capital of North Korea. The North Koreans who had their capital city stolen was economically unstable, as their method of trading had now been in a chaotic mess. However, they reconstructed themselves with the help from other communist states and pushed back with their full force. The UN army started to retreat. However, the Prime Minister of Britain, who couldn't just stand and watch, sent his army to the warfare. Now the UN forces had gathered back at the port of Busan and pushed back again. Within 2 weeks, the Western forces won back Seoul and other major cities such as Incheon. As the UN forces came closer to the border of China, destroying everything in their pathway, receives a little secret assault from a massive group of 500,000 Chinese called People's Volunteer, who fought for their homeland and thought that fighting for their homeland was something righteous and just. Now, as the UN forces started to come closer to the border of China, Stalin persuaded that it was necessary to banish the UN forces to save North Korea, who would protect their southern border from the UN forces. Mao Zedong, who was all desperate and was convinced, sent out his Chinese army, including his famous Red Army, to their southern border to launch a surprise assault on the UN forces when they came to their border. Soon, as the UN forces were seen by the Chinese army, they all swept down the mountains shooting guns and being barbarous. The UN forces had no choice but to do a full-scale retreat. Soon, North Korea was back to normal, and the Chinese army pushed south, and Seoul fell. However, the US forces started to use bombs, as it was a necessity for these kind of situations. Over 600,000 Chinese soldiers died from the bombing, but the UN had won back South Korea. Now, just before the UN forces led by MacArthur was about to push forward again, Truman told them not to. He publicly restated that this war had brought too much devastating effects already, and any more would be horrendous. But MacArthur was deposed, as he didn't listen to his orders. By July 27, 1953, over 600,000 Chinese soldiers, 950,000 North Koreans, including civilians, and 185,000 UN forces, and 125,000 South Koreans, and 12,000 others had been killed in action. The Korean War was the only event that turned Cold War into a hot war, which made it very serious. Without the Korean War, the Cold War would not have been as violent. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Now, as you might have noticed, the extent of the Korean War and the Cold War was very big for several reasons, as they are listed above. And everything major within the Cold War happened around this time span, such as the death of Stalin and appearance of new leaders such as Kim Il-sung and Mao Zedong, and horrendous fights and wars that continued on for 3 years. Thank you.